When I was younger, I had the opportunity to stay in an old Victorian mansion that had been in my family for generations. The house had been abandoned for years, and my parents decided to restore it. We moved in during the summer, and from the moment we arrived, I felt an eerie presence in the house. One evening, while exploring the attic, I found an old, dusty diary. It belonged to a young girl named Emily who had lived in the mansion decades ago. As I read her diary, I learned about her mysterious disappearance and the strange occurrences she had documented. She wrote about hearing whispers and seeing shadowy figures in the hallways. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard faint whispers coming from the attic. I decided to investigate, and as I climbed the stairs, the whispers grew louder. When I reached the attic, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner. It was Emily. She looked at me with pleading eyes and whispered, "Help me." Terrified, I ran back to my room and told my parents. They dismissed it as my imagination, but I knew what I had seen. Over the next few weeks, the whispers continued, and I started seeing Emily's ghostly figure more frequently. One night, I decided to confront her. I went to the attic and called out to her. Emily appeared and told me that she had been trapped in the house, unable to move on because her body had never been found. She asked me to find her remains and give her a proper burial. With her guidance, I searched the house and eventually found a hidden compartment in the basement where her bones were buried. We held a small ceremony to lay her to rest, and from that day on, the whispers stopped and the house felt lighter. I'll never forget Emily's grateful smile as her spirit finally found peace. One summer, I went on a road trip with some friends, and we decided to camp near an old, abandoned railway track in the middle of nowhere. The area had a creepy reputation, but we were looking for adventure. As night fell, we sat around the campfire, sharing ghost stories. Around midnight, we heard the distant sound of a train whistle. It was strange because we knew the tracks hadn't been used in years. The sound grew louder, and soon, we saw the faint outline of a train moving slowly along the tracks. It looked old and ghostly, with dim lights flickering inside. As the train passed, we saw shadowy figures staring out of the windows, their faces pale and mournful. One figure, a young woman, seemed to be reaching out to us, mouthing the words, "Help me." My friends and I were frozen with fear, but we knew we had to do something. The next day, we asked the locals about the train, and they told us about a tragic accident that had occurred decades ago. A passenger train had derailed, killing everyone on board. The spirits of the passengers were said to haunt the tracks, unable to move on. Determined to help, we performed a small ritual that evening, lighting candles and reciting a prayer for the souls of the departed. As we did, the air grew colder, and we felt a presence around us. Suddenly, the ghostly train appeared again, but this time, the faces in the windows looked peaceful. The train slowly vanished into the night, and we knew we had helped the spirits find peace. A few years ago, I rented a secluded cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. It was a charming, rustic place, perfect for escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. On my first night, as I was settling in, I noticed an old portrait hanging on the wall. It was of a stern-looking man, and something about his eyes gave me the creeps. That night, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. I peered out the window, but there was no one there. The next morning, I found strange symbols etched into the dirt around the cabin. I brushed it off as a prank by local kids, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The following night, the footsteps returned, louder and closer. This time, I heard whispers, unintelligible but filled with malice. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, but saw nothing. When I returned, the portrait of the man seemed to be watching me, his eyes following my every move. Desperate for answers, I went to the local library and researched the history of the cabin. I discovered that it once belonged to a man named Harold, who was rumored to have practiced dark rituals and was shunned by the community. He had died mysteriously, and his spirit was said to haunt the cabin, seeking revenge. Determined to confront the spirit, I performed a cleansing ritual I found in an old book. As I chanted the incantation, the cabin grew colder, and the whispers intensified. Suddenly, the portrait fell off the wall, shattering on the floor. The air felt heavy, and I saw Harold's ghostly figure standing in the corner, his eyes filled with rage. I continued the ritual, and slowly, the figure faded, the whispers ceased, and the cabin returned to normal. I left the next morning, never to return. But the experience left me shaken and with a deep respect for the unknown. A few years ago, I decided to take a solo trip to a historic hotel that was known for its beautiful architecture and rich history. Upon arrival, the concierge informed me that the only available room was room 13. Despite the ominous number and the stories of hauntings, I decided to take it, eager for an adventure. That night, as I settled into bed, I heard a faint humming coming from the hallway. I peeked through the door but saw no one. The humming continued, growing louder and more distinct. It was a woman's voice, singing a melancholic tune. I tried to ignore it and went to sleep, but was awakened at midnight by a cold breeze and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I sat up and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face pale and eyes filled with sorrow. She looked at me and whispered, "Help me." Before I could react, she vanished, leaving the room cold and silent. The next morning, I asked the staff about room 13. They hesitated before telling me about a woman named Clara who had stayed in the room many years ago. She was waiting for her lover, but he never arrived. Heartbroken, she ended her life in that very room. Guests who stayed in room 13 often reported seeing her ghost and hearing her sorrowful song. Determined to help her, I spent the day researching old records and discovered the name of her lover. I found out that he had died in a tragic accident on his way to meet her. That evening, I performed a small ritual, lighting candles and reciting a prayer for Clara's spirit. As I spoke, the air grew warmer and I heard the humming again, but this time it was filled with peace. I saw Clara's figure one last time, and she smiled at me before fading away. From that night on, the haunting in room 13 ceased, and I felt a sense of fulfillment knowing I had helped her find peace.